Like that was fun.
Oh man, it would age me, huh?
Where?
They didn't say. They just said in 2003 in northern Texas, the police, the state patrol caught the guy going at 242 miles an hour and wrote him a ticket.
See, now, whenever you said the fastest ticket ever written, I was imagining like, 2 minutes, like from stop to
Yeah, that's the ultimate goal of automation. Just make it quick to write. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, 242 miles an hour, I don't think a tank of gas lasts very long. I got it.
Why did you stop?
Yeah, really. Probably because he ran out of gas, I would imagine.
Well, if you're ready, Greg,
yeah.
I think we're right on time. We should get started.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Oh. Well, actually, it's kind of a reminder about this chord.
Sure.
More to, if people see that, maybe they'll see the chord too.
See, the chair?
Yeah.
Well, we got plugs going both directions. That's not good. It's like multiple hazards.
Yeah.
Anyway.
We didn't design it.
Well. Anyway, thank you all so much for coming to our February North Houston Space Society meeting, and we have a full agenda for us. First off, I was going to have some opening remarks. I had a pretty big first on Thursday that I wanted to share with y'all. It's like really excited about it, felt like SpongeBob. So I'll try to convey that enthusiasm when I tell you. And then we're going to have Patricia tell us about the latest in space weather, what our sun's been doing. And then Greg's going to talk about the latest in space news. And then Brooklyn is going to tell us about some of the astronauts that have inspired her. And so looking forward to that. And then hopefully afterwards we can all meet up at PJ's and hang out for a bit. So what's this? ISS. What's ISS?
Your home away from home.
My home. my baby. Yeah, the International Space Station. 15 different countries have come together to build this thing and operate it. And it's a pretty amazing device. It's a very complicated ship. And it costs a lot to put astronauts in space. And so pretty much we try to keep the astronauts focused on things that only astronauts can do. And that's actually hands-on stuff on the ISS, things that have to do with monitoring the human body. Everything else we attempt to take care of from the ground. And it's really busy too, because it's not just the ISS. I mean, the ISS is going around the Earth every 90 minutes. The Earth is spinning underneath it. That's why you see kind of like the line move a little bit from orbit to orbit. This was a particularly busy day on the ISS. You can see we have, I think, a Progress vehicle, a Cygnus, and a SpaceX all in orbit as well. So I don't remember this day, and it really seems unlikely we'd have all three of those. But this is the most interesting picture of that view that I could have. But anyway, as it's going around, it's actually the vast majority of the ISS systems are being operated from this room and rooms that are connected to this room. Yes.
Ground track flags west, right?
Each ground tract keeps going over to the west. Yes. It's a little exactly, and it keeps doing that. And if you want to know, whenever the station's above you, there's an application you get for your phone called Spot the Station that will tell you and let you know. And it even has like this little VR thing where you can it shows you where it is, which could be useful, especially considering the number of satellites you can see from the ground. You can easily be going, Anyway, it'll help you do that. But most of the systems are actually controlled by this room.
Where's your seat?
Well, I don't actually get to sit in this room yet. And that's what I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit. But in this room, we have lots of different positions. We have the flight director. He's sort of like the guy that's in charge of everything. We have Topo. Topo is actually working with like the Space Force to track orbital debris and making sure that we are taking evasive action should something be hitting us or us hitting something. You have ground control, which of course everybody knows about. ISO actually deals with storage, keeping track of all the different things on the space station's full-time job, literally. A Capcom, which all these people are doing things down here, but we only feed up that information up to the astronauts through one person. That way they're not talking to like 20 different people, and that person can keep really good context on what the astronauts are doing, what they've heard, kind of making sure that it's clear and concise. And
that's short for what?
Capsule communication. Back in the days, whenever we had the Mercury capsule, the Gemini capsule, the Apollo capsule, we have ethos that takes care of the internal environment where the astronauts are, like the carbon dioxide, the oxygen, the temperature, the pressure, the humidity, making sure the toilet works, and treadmill, all those good stuff. We have Cronus, which takes care of all like the different computers, not the computers as in like laptops, but the embedded computers that are actually controlling everything that the rest of the team is dependent upon to actually get telemetry from their systems and to send commands up to it. And the last one I want to point out is Spartan. Now, obviously, we came up with the acronym Spartan, and then we had to figure out what it stood for. Yeah, they actually have a word for that. It's called backronyms. Whenever you kind of come up with a word and you go back. But anyway, it stands for space, power, articulation, and analysis. Thermal analysis, I think, something like that. But kind of coming back to this system, we're responsible for the solar arrays, the radiators, and essentially those are the biggest observable parts of three systems that we're responsible for: the electrical power system, the external thermal control system, and the rotating joint. So we're responsible for everything that moves on the outside of the station except for the robotics.
So now that you've got the your new things up there.
Ah, yes, the IROSAs, the ISS rollout solar arrays that.
Now you've got up to 100% design power.
And we have more than the original design power. Oh, welcome.
That's great.
Yeah. So
you can all plug in your cell phones at the same time and charge them without worrying about blowing anything out.
Right? You can just make sure it's hooked up to a power USB outlet and not to like a computer, because we're really conscious about IT security and stuff like that. So, okay. So what happened on Thursday? Coming back to this room, I'm actually training to work in this position. Right now but yay. Okay. Thank you. But what you don't see in this room is there's a whole bunch of other rooms with people that are supporting people in this room. So they're kind of deep down into their systems, and they're talking to these people and they're supporting them. So I actually work in a back room position for Spartan, which is called Spock. But Ethos has two backroom positions. One's called Star. Anybody want to guess what the other one's called?
Spirit.
No.
Come on, y'all got this. Star.
Stripes.
Trek.
Oh.
The other one's called Trek. Okay. Anyway, but this past Thursday, I had my first. So, in order to train for this room, what we do is we have rooms that are set up similar to this room, where we go through simulations, where we are controlling a software model of the space station. And then we have instructors in a completely different building who are watching what we do, breaking things, and seeing how we respond to it. And then afterwards, they grade us on how well our communication was, our leadership and team coordination, our situational awareness and risk assessment, console management, attitude, effort, and integrity, and a couple of other things. But anyway, this past Thursday, I had my first integrated sim, which was the closest you could get to this, and it was just completely, blew me away. I was like so excited. So hopefully I have better things to tell you all about this in the coming months. Well, with that, I think it's time for some space weather. And I will, thank you all.
Did I turn off the light?
Not yet.
Okay.
I'm still, oh no, you can turn off the light, but in terms of the front room, I don't get into that yet.
Okay.
I will close the door so we can hear you. Oh, and I will give you a microphone so that the people online can hear you. There you go.
Okay. 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 Space weather has been at pretty low levels for the past month, which is fantastic. We've had a good number of M flares. This is just a peek at some of the more impressive ones. We had a total of 18, a little over 18 low-level M flares, so between M1 and M5, and then we had 7 above the M range. The biggest one we had this month was the 8.8. We haven't really gotten a lot of activity from these. There has been some aurora at northern latitudes, but just the normal stuff that we get all the time. So nothing too impressive, nothing too crazy going on up there. Oh, these are different light spectrums. If you go to CDU, I can look it up. I can give you the full name after we're done. But it has different light spectrums that you can see the sun in, and you can see different aspects of it in those different spectrums. Okay.
So you're saying that just for the purposes of the view, it wasn't reflecting necessarily.
Oh, yeah, no, these are just, they're exactly the same thing. This color just makes it look more impressive and stand out better.
Please sign in.
Okay.
While we didn't have a lot of solar flare activity, we did have quite a bit of coronal hole and filament activity. We have had a lot of filaments come off the sun. These are just 3 of the most impressive ones. We haven't really had anything Earth directed. I think we've had a couple of glancing blows, but there have been some very significant bursts that thankfully missed us. And of course, with the coronal hole, that increases the solar wind. That can also add to the auroras. Oh, and this one right here is the coronal hole for today. So you can see we have this one right here. And then it looks like there might be something coming in over here. So we'll have to see if that one right there amounts to anything.
Do you think Texas through coronal holes, or is there like any sort of danger associated with coronal holes?
It increases the solar wind.
Okay.
So still learning.
Sign in.
Still learning, so I don't know the full scope of it. But when there's a coronal hole facing the Earth, it increases the solar wind.
Okay.
And so we can get northern lights just from a coronal hole without any flare activity.
So even if it's just like it's an M-class flare, you're saying that coronal holes can put on quite a show?
The coronal holes can put on quite a show. I feel like it looks different. When it's bigger flares, there seems to be more colors. From what I've seen, when the coronal holes are present, and when either it's just them and no flare activity, or when they're adding to flare activity, when there's the influence of both, I feel like we see more of the whites and maybe some more of the purples. That's just an observation, so I don't know for sure. It could be unrelated, but just that's a trend I've noticed. Okay, and so since we've gone over a slow month, I want to show you what's incoming. Right now, the Earth side of the sun, we have one dynamic sunspot that's heading out of view, and you can kind of see that right here. But this is the far side. This is what we are anticipating coming into Earth view.
And we know this because of
The,
solar heliospheric observatory or whatever it's called, SOHO.
that's part of it. This one is the gong far side.
Okay,
And as you can see, we don't know exactly what's coming because I don't think right now it's on the side that can see it real clearly. But this is what we're anticipating. This is what may come into Earth view.
and what's the Earth's or what's the sun's rotation period? When are we going to make it?
Well, this right here, so these will probably take another 12, 13 days to come into view because it's 27 days total. And so these are just basically just left Earth view. These will be coming into Earth view. Even in, I would say these right here in the next few days, within the next week. And then the rest of them following after that.
Busy.
Yes. So maybe we'll see more activity. It's hopeful. We've had a quiet month, gotten some rest. And I'll leave you with a few pictures of the Northern Lights that have come out. These ones are from Norway on January 25th. The ones that have the little swirls are some of my favorites. And then these are from Gift Lake, Alberta on February 2nd. And you can just see the beauty and all the shapes and colors, and it's just wonderful. But that's all I have. It was a slow month and all done. Thank you.
Oh, for you. I just closed the
Oh,
door.
The Norwegian location is a lot north from Alberta location.
Yes.
The Norwegians get some swirlies more than the Swedes.
The Canadians get swirly sometimes too.
okay. Monthly space news, obviously covering about a month. You can probably kind of an idea. Oh, I was the one who was worried about people kicking that out, and I was the one who did it. It should come back. A couple of big stories that are should be showing up on this.
You might have to do the resharing.
Yeah, I probably have to restart it here.
Also the resharing.
Oh, that badly, huh? Yeah, you're probably right. And this is why we don't want people tripping on this.
It's like Home Improvement where they I don't know if y'all saw that show with
Oh yeah,
all these things. Like they were supposed to be like they get a safety award, but then they actually accidentally did all these things. Oh really? It's a great show.
Okay, well, let's just get right into it here. All kinds of things happened. One of them was the first launch of the New Glenn, which is the rocket that came from Blue Origin. That's the Jeff Bezos company. This has been a long time coming. People have been waiting for it for quite a while. And because they actually started before SpaceX, and they just got something to orbit now, finally, for the first time. And it was actually pretty impressive in a way. I mean, after all these years of delay, to actually achieve orbit on the very first try is actually quite an accomplishment. Not many rockets actually accomplish that. And even more interesting, they went all the way to medium Earth orbit. They didn't just settle for barely making it up to the lowest possible orbits, the low Earth orbits. They went up. It's an elliptical orbit, about 1,500 miles by about 12,000 miles. So, it covers pretty much a very large section of that. So they're aiming their market at that, not just low Earth orbit. So that's important to them. Now, so it was a success. It wasn't 100% success because they had kind of a secondary goal. And they said in the beginning, well, we probably can't do this, but we're going to try to land our booster on a barge on the very first try. And that did not succeed. But then again, they tempered expectations on that. They didn't necessarily expect that they'd be able to. And this actually is interesting because this is their very first flight to get qualified to launch national security things like spy satellites and that kind of thing. This actually counts as the first launch. Already their very first launch, they're starting their certification process. So this thing is really big. I'll show you some numbers and some pictures later on. Not as big as Starship. It is bigger than just about anything else except SLS and Starship. Yeah.
How many flights do they need to get qualified?
It's only 2 or 3. It's not that many. Yeah, it's not like. Yeah. Anyway, it's not like human certification. Although the qualifications for that are pretty hard to really tell. Okay, just another picture of that. You saw the ground launch picture. Actually, I should have highlighted. What I assume that is a time-lapse photograph where they're actually showing the second stage lighting up. I assume that accounts for that too. I never actually saw anybody comment on that. That's kind of an interesting time-lapse photograph. This is another view taking off. People have commented in particular that the really nice blue flame, they get a nicer looking flame actually than other methane-fueled rockets have of late. Now, it also included something else. They called it a dummy payload, but really, it actually is something that they're also trying to make a product out of, which is essentially a space tug. You think of it as a small satellite, but it can also drag around other satellites. It's really part of its job. So it's an orbital transfer vehicle. They put it up there. Now, what they did is they're not actually testing out moving from place. Oh, you can register. They're not actually testing out moving that thing around, but their goal here is pretty much to accomplish what happens with the Starship, with the Falcon 9 launches, where they bundle together a whole bunch of satellites that all want to go to different orbits. They just shoot them up to one particular orbit, and then there's those little space tugs that take them to the other orbits they want to get to. And they want that part of the business as well, and that's part of what Pathfinder is all about. They can move around about 6,600 pounds is their goal. Partly funded by the Department of Defense. They had a lot of interest in doing this. Anyway, this whole test, dummy payload, so to speak, was about at least 40,000 pounds. The numbers vary depending on your source, but they give you that kind of an idea. That's a pretty substantial load. So for a first launch, again, quite good. I would say even that the SpaceX early launches and Starship, they didn't have much of a payload at all. So they actually put a real payload weight in there. So Space Tug is one of the applications. Try to capture some of that business that third parties are now getting instead of SpaceX. Also, they're talking about other possible uses in space computing. We actually talked about this in one of our earlier sessions where people are talking about putting data centers up in space. You got solar power up in space. That's pretty straightforward. We've done that for years. But getting that power back to Earth, that's problematic. You got to convert it to microwaves. You lose a lot in the atmosphere. People worry it could be a weapon. All kinds of stuff, that causes trouble with that. Whereas if you just put computers up there, they can do their computing thing quite happily. They only have to send back the results. So it's a lot easier than transmitting power to Earth. And I think they're aiming for some of that. So one thing about Blue Origin, they've been criticized pretty heavily in the past for just moving slowly. Part of it really came back to the top management outside of Jeff Bezos as the ultimate owner. They really kind of came out of the older space companies, and they were just slow. And they actually had this coat of arms. I don't quite know why you need a coat of arms, but they had a coat of arms. It has turtles on it, kind of referencing the tortoise and the hare. And it has this Latin saying, which apparently means step by step ferociously. And everybody was always kind of joking, well, the step-by-step part, they got that down. Ferocious, not so much. Well, now maybe it actually is picking up. They did change the CEO out. They brought in somebody from Amazon who didn't have that much aerospace experience, but on the other hand, was considered to be a much better manager. And from what people are saying, things are moving a lot more quickly now at Blue Origin. And now we're starting to see the result of admittedly years and years of work, but people are thinking that, things are probably turning around. They may actually get to be a much more serious competitor because they obviously have not been one so far. And of course, they've been criticized, instead of actually building a rocket, they were just suing, to get their place reserved for whenever the rockets were ready. And there was some justification for that. In fact, at least partially, and maybe because of lawfare, they are actually competing in the sense that they have a lot of customers already, not just NASA, but Amazon's Project Kuiper, for instance, which will have thousands of satellites. They will be their ultimate customer. They just weren't ready for it. AST Space Mobile, we've talked about cell phone, that's the alternative to the SpaceX version of regular cell phone communication via satellite, and some of the telecom providers along with that, and national security launches. A lot of these people all want to have some solution other than SpaceX. Nobody really wants a monopoly, kind of a thing. So people are kind of rooting for a second player. People always assumed Blue Origin would be that. They kind of lagged and had been kind of disappointing up until now. Now, I think they're finally proving that they may be really serious. One thing about them is their rocket, at least their first stage, is reusable. And that's a key to really having costs come down. Unlike all the other competitors that are out there, like Vulcan from United Launch Alliance, the Ariane 6 out of Europe, the H3 from Japan, they're all just kind of traditional rockets. They just are thrown away. And, there's always that old analogy of, well, if you had to throw away the airplane every time you flew to Tokyo, it would cost you a lot to get to Tokyo. And so, they will be able to address that. Now, they didn't succeed in catching that booster on the very first try, but then again, neither has anybody else. I mean, that's not SpaceX, not the Chinese, who are also trying to catch up in this area. Just to give you an idea on the relative sizes, we talk about big. So on the far right-hand side, there's Starship. It does kind of dwarf everything else. Blue Origin is the next one there. I don't actually show SLS in this particular chart, but it's actually in between Blue Origin and Starship. And then on down let me get the pointer out here. So Blue Origin, this is actually a Terran R, which may or may not ever come into existence. It actually is pretty big. The one to beat right now is the Falcon 9 from SpaceX, that one there in the middle. And there's a whole cluster of them. They're really about the same size as the Falcon 9. There's the Ariane 6, which is the new European one. There's the Vulcan out of the United Launch Alliance. There's a smaller one. That's actually a China one. That rocket there, it's called the ZQ-2. That one was the first rocket that made it to orbit with methane as a fuel. They beat everybody else, including SpaceX and Blue Origin. The other Neutron, that's a product of Rocket Lab that presumably is coming along. It may not launch this year, but it's getting closer to launch time. No, but their next version is, and they're working pretty hard on that. So all these. China's kind of in this big turmoil right now. They just have like 10 or 12 different things going on. One by one, they will drop out, and they're all trying all the different tricks and techniques. And so they try every different thing. They try solid, they try different fuels, they try solid boosters or not, they try reusability or not. But this is one of the leading ones that people expect to actually make it with a reusable rocket pretty soon. Their big heavy lift vehicle with a Long March something or other name will also be eventually reusable, but they haven't really demonstrated that yet. But they're coming along anyway. But don't take these, don't get out a ruler and actually try to measure that. These are kind of eyeballed. I didn't actually calculate down to the millimeter here. Okay, but the data that comes from it, most of this is actually you can get it out of Wikipedia for the most part. But not all of it. A lot of times, especially when you get to things like launch cost, well, that really depends on who you ask and what special pricing one company or another gave. But it gives you the idea. Roughly, there's a spectrum here, essentially ordered more or less on low Earth orbit capability. That is, how much can you lift to low Earth orbit in thousands of pounds? And there's typically ranges on these things because there's configuration differences. I mean, for instance, the Ariane 6 has some flexibility. You can have 2 or 4 solid boosters. So if you want to put a lot up there, you add more boosters to it. Vulcan Centaur, that one in particular, you can have none or 2, 4, or 6. So you have a lot of flexibility there. They really define that one with a lot of flexibility. All the reusable ones go for no. They don't even have solid boosters. pretty bad from an environmental standpoint. It definitely is not reusable. You cannot reuse a solid booster. So they're not really probably the end result in the future, but it's certainly a traditional way that people have attacked getting into space. We put in things here like who has reusable first stages. A variety of these do. Actually, nothing except Starship yet is doing reusable stage 2. Well, of course, theirs isn't actually reusable yet, but at least that's their goal. And that's one of the problems here is talking about what version. Just sign a registration.
Brief summary of current status of Vulcan and LA.
It works. It uses the engines actually from Blue Origin. They have a lot of launches scheduled. They've only had that one launch, and they had some trouble with the booster. It didn't really quite perform like it should have. But I think that was part of the certification testing. I think that was considered a pass because they did achieve orbit, even though the booster didn't really behave the way it was supposed to. So I think people think it'll come through. And then the Centaur, that it's been modified, but it's been around. That thing's kind of been around for a long time. So
the notion is, when are they going to launch Sierra Nevada?
They're still on for this year, I think. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, I'm not sure Sierra Nevada was really ready either. That's the other.
We're talking about the
space
Nevada,
plane.
little baby space plane,
Yeah.
little baby space shuttle.
Yeah. So it's always a race as to who can fall behind the most first. So something. But yeah, that's been a challenge, and that's normal in the business. One thing you can say about people that build rockets and to build the things that go in rockets is they don't always deliver on time. That's just not unusual. So anyway, I just thought you might be interested in some of this. But there's ranges on a lot of these numbers. One, because of like how many solid boosters you have, if you have them. In the case of the reusable ones, it gets really complicated with Falcon, for instance, because you have the case of, well, are you completely reusing your first stage booster? And even there, are you returning it all the way to the launch site, which takes the most energy, or are you just dropping it down on a barge in the ocean, which it means it doesn't have to come back as far. Typically, you're launching to the east, take advantage of the Earth's rotation, like from Florida, and you can come all the way back to Florida. That takes more fuel, so you have less available for payload. Whereas if you go and just come back in the ocean somewhere, it takes less. Yeah.
Did New Glenn actually carry Orion to orbit?
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I would presume so. I mean, a lot of these, when you get to those kind of questions.
99,000 pounds, I would think so.
Well,
I don't think that Orion capsule weighs 99,000.
No, and the numbers get a little more iffy when you get to these. Like the GTO is geosynchronous transfer orbit. That's not getting to a geo orbit. That's getting to the orbit that'll take you there, and then on the assumption that the satellite or whatever gets you there. And then the translunar injection (TLI), I mean, that says it'll get you to an orbit that will take you so that you can actually get to the moon. It's not the actual moon orbit, and so
you might be able to get it to low Earth orbit or even medium or no orbit, but getting Orion to the translunar injection orbit, and that's supposedly what it's designed for, to be 15,000 pounds.
Yeah.
And so that's okay.
Well, it also depends on what else is in that payload, and I mean that shows up when I get to the moon launches that are coming up. There's two of them that are being launched. There were two of them put on one Falcon 9, both of them going to land on the moon. But Falcon 9 isn't taking him to the moon. It's just taking him actually just to an Earth orbit, and they're getting there on their own after that. So it's pretty hard to answer those kind of questions. And then it depends on where. Like if you're going to the Gateway, well, that when they have that, that's a really hard, that's harder to get to, so who knows.
Apollo missions required was like 125, it was 125 tons, I think, 250,000 pounds. But of course, that also included getting the astronauts all the way down to the ground inside of the lunar module and then bringing it, coming back up, and then catching. And so I'm just going to do a flyby, kind of like Orion, but maybe get rid of about a third of that fuel requirement. So it's still talking somewhere around 180,000 pounds required to get the PLI, you'd be able to put something like that.
Yeah.
I think it'd be your starting figure, you could pencil in.
Yeah. Now with Starship, you're talking Block 2, that's the current version of the upper stage, which failed completely. And we're still on Block 1 for the boosters. So it's, you don't know how good these numbers are anyway. But so far, I mean, it looks like Starship is still going to by far have the most capacity for any of these orbits. It doesn't do as well compared to the other, in particular compared to Vulcan and Ariane 6, because they have hydrogen second stages, which is basically, you get a higher velocity coming out of the exhaust, you do a little better. So the Vulcan and Ariane 6 look better than you might think for the higher energy orbits. And that's partly what they're selling it on. Now, of course, most of the business is launching, big constellations of communication satellites to low Earth orbit. So it's kind of different. They're going to go for a lot of the national defense kind of market. Big thing down here to look at is cost. There's kind of a range on all these, again, depending on whether you're returning to the launch site or throwing away the rocket and that kind of stuff. The only one that really stands out, there's a couple of them. One of them is Starship. They're guessing maybe they can do that for like $100 million for a launch, but it has a whole lot more capacity than the others. But that's in expendable mode. Now, once they really get reusability going, especially for those stages, presumably that's going to come down. But that's pretty speculative. I wouldn't take those numbers too seriously right now. But one we do know pretty well is SLS. That's the one that stands out. You're talking, the units are billions rather than hundreds of millions in the case of SLS for one launch, 2.5 to 4 billion, depending on which audit the government happens to have done most recently. I mean, that's just so far off the charts. That's why it never had a commercial future. It had other reasons, for being there.
And there's a very surprising Boeing employee meeting that happened on Friday.
I'd say a very unsurprising meeting.
Oh, maybe unsurprising.
Yeah, to me, I think it's completely unsurprising. I think an awful lot of people assume SLS was going to die, but maybe not this soon. Mainly because it was a jobs program, created to keep the shuttle companies and employees employed, and so they kind of dictated the technologies, and because of the natural way that NASA maintains support is they have facilities in every state, and literally for SLS there are parts of the SLS rocket that are built in every single state, and as a result every state has some incentive to keep a piece of it because they have some people employed doing it. It's a great strategy for maintaining your agency, but it's not too good for efficiency, and you kind of end up with results like that.
Can you say a few more words about the Boeing meeting?
Yeah, so Boeing had a meeting of their workforce and said that there's a chance that SLS may be canceled, is essentially what they had said. Nothing specific, it just
they're giving a warning that, politically it's not as well supported as it used to be. And it came down to being a political issue more than anything else at this point.
What's your feel? Is it a 50-50, 75% chance it's going to be canceled?
I would say let the new NASA administrator get confirmed, give him a couple of months, and then we'll have a better direction on where things are going.
Yeah.
So maybe in May.
A lot of people kind of assumed you'd probably make it through Artemis 3, before it actually would get canceled. Artemis 3 is the one that would actually put people on the ground. Just because that way, whoever's in charge can still sort of take credit for there being a lunar landing, even though there wasn't a future in that particular path to space. There was a dead-end path, but nonetheless, it was the program that there was. And, there was no alternative at the time it was started. And even now, I mean, you don't have a working Starship. It is part of the Artemis program, though. So if it doesn't work, that's what's supposed to take you down to the moon and back up. So if that doesn't work, actually, Artemis, the lunar mission, doesn't last anyway. So we're in this awkward position right now where most people kind of assume that, SLS can't be the future path for getting to space just because of cost. But when do you make that transition? And, there's at least a lot of the former politicians that were strong supporters of it, like Shelby of Alabama, he was, a lot of that was built around Huntsville. They made sure that it stayed in place. And then you had Bill Nelson, who was one of the fathers of SLS in a way. He was the head, he was the head of NASA there. So, and he ordered like the next, I don't know, 8 or 10 or 12 solid boosters. Each of those boosters for one flight cost $500 million. So, the pair of boosters. And he ordered way, way ahead on that, far ahead. So he was sort of gambling one way or another. He wanted to keep us committed to that. That was the strategy there. So it's very hard to tell, because ultimately, if the Senate still insists on maintaining SLS because they like the jobs in their districts, it may continue for quite a while. So you can't tell. Yeah, yeah. And it's dangerous because it gets into everything gets so political in this stuff. But it's been kind of bipartisan. There are an awful lot of people who really don't like SLS, except for the people that are directly involved in it. The people that are directly, paid by those programs. If you work for Boeing, obviously you're much in favor of it. Okay, moving on here. Okay, so we were talking about Starship a little bit. Of course, they had a test which had a spectacular success and a spectacular failure, all in the same test. And that's kind of represented in those pictures there. On the right-hand side, that's the pieces of stage 2 coming down over the Turks and Caicos Islands.
Which helped to improve my geographic knowledge of the Caribbean. I had not heard of that island before.
I had to go look at a map. I knew it was down there somewhere, but yeah.
Where is it for the rest of it?
I can't describe it as well as Google Maps. So
well, as you fly east, and you're kind of threading your way between Cuba and the U.S., it's a little bit past that somewhere in there because it was on that flight path. So they have a very narrow flight path they have to stick to, mainly to avoid dropping stuff on Cuba. We ended up paying a lot of money to Cuba. I mentioned this in the story a long time ago. We paid for a couple of Cuban cows. It might have been the 60s, maybe the 50s. I don't know. I mean, they were. They had a point though. We dropped debris on them, and we've been very sensitive about trying not to do that ever since.
And luckily this time, I think it was only confirmed report was an unoccupied car, so we kind of improved our cow count.
yeah. No cows were killed in the making of this. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, flight test 7, January 16th. This was still suborbital. That was the plan. They didn't go beyond that. It's, as I said, it was the newer version of the upper stage. They refer to that as ship. That's Block 2 in aerospace terms. Block 1 was still the older style boosters. They're still using just the Raptor 2 engines. They have these Raptor 3s they talked about, which are much more powerful, but they're not actually putting them in these tests yet. The booster returned to the launch site, as shown on that picture on the right-hand side there. Pretty much the same as test 5. Actually, if you watched it, it was smoother. I'd say they controlled it better. I mean, it really just came in really, really nicely, not a lot of overshoot and vibration and that kind of stuff. They really did a good job on that. They did have a problem along the way. One engine didn't restart. In the overall process, the second stage launches off. The booster has to turn around and start heading. So it has to fire some engines and slow itself down and start heading back to launch. One of the engines didn't restart. And what's interesting is that then they coast for a while, and then they absorb a lot of heat in their heat-absorbing tiles. And then when it gets close to actual landing time, they have to fire them again. Well, that engine then finally did restart. So whatever they had was some kind of a temporary problem, like a freezing in a fuel line or, that kind of a thing. I don't know that they have an explanation for it yet. But anyway, it didn't matter that much. They had enough spare power available. Other things on this particular booster test was they did reuse one engine that came out of flight test 5. So they're starting, working on, can we reuse the engines at least? And it was in the outer ring of the, there's multiple engines there. So it's in the outer ring, meaning that wasn't even used at launch. So the one that failed was not the reused one. It was a different one. So anyway, that was the successful part. But of course, there's this other part. And that's as shown on the right-hand side here. The upper stage engine started to fail. And there was a fire. And that was apparently visible on some of the TV cameras. And we were looking at some of the fins in the gap. You could see flame in there. I mean, there was actually flames going on inside the vessel. The fire started. One by one, the engines were failing. And finally, the ship actually blew up, or RUD, Rapid Unscheduled Disassembly, as they like to say. But it blew up. And again, that's kind of what it looked like. Probable cause was a propellant leak, is what they said. Now, where, I don't know that they know that, because they had just completely redesigned and rebuilt how the propellants are handled, and there's extra insulation and all this. It was a new vessel, so we don't know. This was quite visible. I mean, that's why people were taking pictures of it. That's actually from a video at that. Aviation was disrupted. They actually, people were warned, but they really went outside of the official area. Normally, an area gets declared as a hazardous zone when you have, almost any kind of a rocket flight like this. And some of that debris started falling outside of it. And so that disrupted aviation for at least a couple of hours. Scared quite a few people. And the debris fell outside of the hazard zones. Most of it washed up on Island Beach, if people found it anyway. And I think not all that much dropped directly on land, but there was some. The car case that you were mentioning. And this did drive more complaints than normal, about the test dangers. It's like a reminder that, yeah, we really, got to be careful, try not to let this happen. Anyway, this was the first test of the version 2. So they didn't really get a chance to do a lot of the tests for the upper stage that they hoped to. All those things depended on deploying the satellites, for instance, when they are launching Starlink satellites or something. They wanted to start practicing that. They want to do some reentry experiments to start figuring out, can you start to put the little hooks on the outside without melting them off so that you can catch it in the Mechazilla, the chopstick things. So they couldn't get to any of that. So they didn't get much data on that. Okay, a lot of news on the moon. 2 moon missions that were launched. Well, actually on the same rocket, I mentioned this briefly, the Falcon 9 launched 2 of them. One called Blue Ghost, which is by Firefly Aerospace, a US startup kind of company. Well, they've been around a while, but it's a US small company. And then there's one by iSpace Japan, which is a private Japanese company, although they have a significant presence in Europe and in the United States. So they're really they are a multinational corporation. So Blue Ghost first. This was actually under NASA's CLPS program, Commercial Lunar Payload Services. This is the one that a lot of these missions are being funded, or at least partly funded by, where they are acting as kind of the anchor business partner, where they say they want certain things to happen, but they're basically paying for the service to get there, as opposed to buying the rocket and taking responsibility for transportation. They're ultimately trying to have space trucks. The thing weighs a little over 1,000 pounds, including the payloads, not including the fuel. That's called dry mass, which is what it weighs without the fuel. Almost 7 feet tall, almost 12 feet wide. So it's kind of squat. They emphasize that helps with stability. Things aren't going to tip over so easily, like they did for a couple of previous launches of other landers. It uses a hypergolic propellant. That's pretty normal for something like a long deep space mission where you need to be able to restart under any condition. Hypergolic means if it's a binary one, you have 2 fuels, they come together and they just automatically ignite without any effort. You don't have a special lighting process or anything. You just bring them together and they essentially explode. 400 watts of power. It'll be landing on March 2nd. And it's not worth going through all these details. You can find this stuff on their website. The Firefly website actually goes into great detail on what's there. So if you're wondering what some of this stuff is that you're looking at here, some of it's obvious, like the thrusters at the bottom, the big bell-shaped kind of things. They have to have big nozzles because you're in vacuum. Anyway, so they have that, but they talk about some of the stuff in this picture. I don't think it's worth really going through. I will talk briefly about the orbit. This is very much like what you saw some of the previous landers do, like India's in particular. What you do is you just get up to low Earth orbit on the left-hand side there. That's around Earth. And then every time you're in as close to Earth as possible, you have a burst of power into the engine, and that raises your orbit in an elliptical kind of way. The way to think of it is almost like if you're standing in place and you throw something up in the air, it comes back to where you are, but it goes up high and comes back. And it's doing kind of the same thing. All that extra energy really goes into raising the orbit on the other side of the Earth there. And so you do that a bunch of times, and each time the orbit gets bigger and bigger. And then eventually you say, okay, that's it. We got enough velocity. We're heading to the moon. And you go into a translunar orbit, which is something like the 8 and 9 kind of area there.
We're just about at that point.
Yeah, I think that's about where they are right now.
3 more days or orbit.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, one benefit of this approach is they have plenty of time to, if they had some problems along the way, they have time to adjust so they get the maximum daylight time on the moon. Because all these landers are really just mainly designed to last during the lunar day, which is 14 days, or Earth days.
They have a little 15-minute, every week they're doing an update, a little 10-minute, 12-minute thing.
Mm. Yeah. And some of the experiments are already running. For instance, one of the payloads on this particular mission is some radiation sensors. They're monitoring because they want to know what is the radiation levels all over the place, because it's bad for people and it's bad for equipment. And the only way to find that out is to go there. And so this gives you more data every time you go anywhere in space. If you're taking radiation readings, you learn more. And of course, that they're especially interested on land. When you get down to the moon, when you're landed, then well, what about there? So anyway, that's one mission payload that in fact is already started and probably providing some useful data. This is not worth going into, but for anybody who wants to see the details, well, how do they actually land, the steps they go through, this is on their website as well. Fundamentally, it's just like bringing the booster back to Earth on one of those Starship things. You turn around, you have a burn to slow yourself down, then they scan the surface and they look for a really flat place, and then they just essentially adjust themselves and finally land. Like most of the others, they don't actually try to land perfectly, at zero velocity. Usually they go for about a meter a second, 3 feet a second. And they have good shock absorbing legs. That's part of their design, so they can handle that pretty well. Okay, I'd mentioned briefly the payloads. Again, you can go into detail by looking at their website. But they have some things we mentioned, like the radiation sensing, various cameras. One interesting test, I don't even know the details of it, but they're doing some kind of a test on a dust shield, electrostatic dust shield, because dust on the moon is one of the biggest problems to actually being there. Okay, next one, the lunar lander by iSpace, which is a Japanese company. Not to be confused with iDash-Space, which is a Chinese company. So that it's interesting. These people, I think, were actually first. There's a smaller, about 750 pounds at landing with all of the experiments on it. They're taking a completely different route to getting there. They're not doing at all what the Indians and the others have done. These are the people that failed the last time. And I don't know if you remember, it was kind of interesting why they failed. There's a whole video about that I had done, going into more depth on that. If you're really interested, you could go look at that. But fundamentally, they only had one sensor, an altimeter, probably radar. I think it was radar, not even laser. And they didn't really account. What they said was, of course, they're doing checks. And if one of the typical sensor checks in any system is, well, if you get a sudden change in value, you probably should ignore that because, physically you just can't move that fast. But they forgot that if you fly over the edge of a crater, then all of a sudden, like if it's a 5 kilometer deep crater, well, all of a sudden it looks like your altitude just increased by 5 kilometers. And that's exactly what they thought happened. So they said, oh, that reading must not be any good. It actually was good, but they disabled it. The problem was they didn't have any backup sensor. And they're just relying on inertial navigation. It fundamentally just slowly kept coming down, thinking it was almost landing, when actually it was 5 kilometers above the crater floor.
5 meters.
Well, it started off 5 kilometers ahead. It thought it was 5 meters maybe, but it was actually 5 kilometers. So it was up that high, and then it just gradually was coming down slower and slower, thinking it was getting closer and closer to the ground when it was nowhere near. It just ran out of fuel, and then at that point it fell and crashed. So that was the failure. So they've said they fixed that, but they keep referring to it as a software bug. And it wasn't a software bug. It was a failure to think through. It was a failure to think through the different failures that could happen. And so I don't know if they actually added additional sensors or not. Nobody has said anything about that. Part of the reason they had this problem was they changed the destination at the last minute on the first mission. They weren't going to land in a crater the first time. And then, so they changed it, but they didn't test it. Even in software, they didn't go through and just simulate what would happen, if you landed at the new location. And sure enough, it crashed. So I don't know if I'm sure, two things. One, I think they're landing in a big flat area that doesn't really go over a big crater like that. I don't know if they've actually done any other upgrades. The trajectory, as I was saying, is completely different. It's actually built into they had kind of a logo. And it wasn't quite a mission patch, and it's not just the little circular thing with the rabbit ears, the Hakuto, actually, how you pronounce that, how that goes. But basically, they shoot out way, Earth is in the center of that. The yellow orbit there is the moon. And they shoot out way past that. Kind of, at some point, they probably reach a point where either the sun and the Earth or the sun and the moon, gravity is combined because they're lined up. And at that point, they head back with a little extra gravity pull, and they do as a result, they don't need much fuel to do any of this kind of stuff. And they've never published much in the way of details. And I think mission 2, they changed it slightly because I saw one picture and there's one extra lunar flyby in the thing somehow. So they've done a little bit more. They've actually taken it slightly farther. But anyway, there are different ways to go from place A to place B in the universe. And when you're sending a robotic probe, you don't worry about how long it takes. If it takes you 4.5 months instead of a couple of weeks, well, it's no big deal. And that's what they're doing. Payloads, one of which is a rover. That's a picture of the rover there. Their first mission, they had one that was built in the United Arab Emirates by the university there. Well, actually with a lot of help from the University of Colorado. But it was a joint kind of a project. This one is really their own, designed and built in Luxembourg, of all places. But actually, it turns out they have offices in Luxembourg. Their European offices are there. So this is all part of their efforts. And also, Luxembourg actually wants to be a space power. They're not doing launches and stuff, but they'll do licensing. They're doing a lot of the satellite kind of stuff. They're trying to build up a whole industry there. So they have that. That's the rover. Their emphasis is that it's really, really lightweight. You see those metal wheels with lots of air spaces in it and that sort of thing. There's also 3 experiments. One is doing electrolysis of water. We all talk casually that, well, we're going to electrolyze the water there that we find in the ice, and we'll make rocket fuel out of that eventually. Well, it hasn't really been tested on the moon, so they're actually going to do some of that. They're going to do some food production with algae. Deep space radiation monitoring I already mentioned, but there's 2 parts to that. One is the radiation sensor, which everybody does. I mean, everybody tries to monitor radiation. But the other thing is they're doing a much more direct measure of how much will it impact computer equipment. And what they just simply did was they just basically took a whole bunch of memory and they set it all to zeros. And then they just watch and they see, they check like every 15 minutes or on some time period, they check, well, did any of those get flipped? Meaning a cosmic ray hits it, it interferes with it so much it flips the bit from reading 0 to reading 1. And they just count that. It's a simple measure. But on the other hand, other people apparently haven't done that too much. So
Greg, about how big is this rover?
it's about a foot, something like a foot, maybe 2 feet at most. It's like, a couple feet.
Okay.
Suitcase size, sort of.
Hmm?
Bigger than a briefcase, but sort of like a smaller suitcase.
You can pick it up. I've seen pictures of people walking around just kind of about like that.
Like the space Pomeranian.
There you go. I'm sure. Yeah, you should write them. Maybe they'll maybe they'll change their logo. Okay. Now they're also putting down, besides these actual serious experiments, they're putting down a commemorative plaque. Okay, that's fine. And the other interesting one is some Swedish art, and it's specifically called the Moon House. And you're thinking, wow, well, why did they pick that? And when you see the picture, what it's going to look like, that's it. It's the little house. Now, and it's actually less than 5 inches wide. You can't judge the scale on this. And you look at that and you go, okay, that's art. 70 people, mostly, I think probably all Swedish, paid the total price, like between $600,000 and $900,000. They raised money to actually pay for this. So it's amazing. People will pay money to do all kinds of things that you might not have thought of in space. And here they're funding, some basic research on how do we get to the moon cheaply by putting that thing on the moon. Apparently, it's a Swedish thing. There's just no other explanation. This similar house has been placed. Actually, there was one place in the space station. I think it was made of cardboard. It was pop-up kind of a thing. It's kind of like there was this old fad in the U.S. for people with kids. They did flat Stanley. It was just some person. They just basically photobombed every picture of every tourist site they could with that. Well, I think it's kind of like this for the Swedes. This is supposed to represent an earlier, comfortable time for them. A cozy little house, like it's a Swedish thing. But it's interesting. I mean, here it's a Japanese company, but they're building the product in Luxembourg and they're putting art up from Sweden. So I think this is just more pictures of the venture. One interesting one is, besides all the various payloads we talked about, this thing itself will do a little bit of scooping, and there's a particular reason for that. It's called Venture 4 in this picture. The scoop is here in the front, right-hand side of that one. It'll go down further, and I got a close-up picture of that. You see that on the left-hand side of this picture. It just goes into dirt, and the thing just rolls forward, scoops it up, and then it picks it back up and puts it in there. Why are they doing that? They're selling that to NASA. Why are they selling that to NASA? Well, NASA, the U.S., really wants to establish the Artemis Accords as a legal norm that you can extract resources from the moon. By the Outer Space Treaty, you can't own it, especially companies in particular, or countries in particular can't own it. But you have rights we interpret the treaty to say that you can at least extract materials from it and sell it. And that's been done because people have sold some of the lunar rocks and things that were brought back by the Apollo astronauts. There has been some of that. So you could say, okay, the precedent has been set, but this is kind of reinforcing that.
It starts setting up the commercial process and the legal
Yeah.
outline of that process.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, if you want private enterprise to start developing space, you need to have a legal, basically a legal framework in place. And this is part of getting to that. And it really is independent of whether it's a capitalist society or a social society, because still the question is, if you're China, how much effort are you going to put into going somewhere if you can't actually use the resources? It changes how fast you go into space. So it's a kind of independent of government type, but it is something that the US hopes everybody will agree to. The Chinese will not sign up with the Artemis Accords, but they have actually kind of indicated that this kind of thing, yeah, they support that because they want to go there and extract resources too. That's about it on. Oh, one other thing that's interesting is how does it get from the lander down to the surface? So earlier things you saw on places like Mars, you always had these nice little ramps, everything came down. This thing just has a little arm, it flips out, and then it just drops at a meter. Because the gravity isn't that high. It just kind of drops down, they show it bouncing a little bit, and that's it. And that's probably true for a lot of the payloads they might handle if they have to remove it from the spacecraft. Okay, upcoming launches, we talked about this last time, so I'll just highlight the changes. We still have Intuitive Machines coming up with their lunar lander. That's actually good. That may get there about the same time or before the Japanese one does, even though it hasn't been launched yet. Rocket Lab, remember we talked about that project going to Venus, a private mission to Venus. It turns out that's gotten delayed. I haven't found any information on why. It doesn't show up on anybody's website yet that I found, but apparently it has been delayed. And Amazon's Project Kuiper, they're still expecting to do their first launch pretty soon here. The other one that's been delayed, though, is the vast space station. That one has been delayed to back to 2026. Originally, they were talking about launching maybe this year, and I think that was probably premature. Okay, that's really it. The other ones there really haven't changed. That's it.
Awesome.
Yeah. Oh, right on time. Yeah. Thank you.
Now, let me see if I can do something about the lighting. That's really bright.
Yeah.
Okay, oh, hey, there we go. Maybe that works out.
Hey, Greg,
Yeah.
ULA is still, they're the ones who sell the Atlas V.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks
Yeah.
for coming.
So they still have some left. They're out there.
They've shut down the production line.
Oh yeah, no, they're long.
These are
They're definitely gone.
the ones that are in
I
the
wanted to
warehouse.
see if we could move the power cable so it comes out this way, so at least there's one way we don't have cable.
Oh, okay.
I have another.
Oh, all right.
Oh, and this power cord actually.
That's my power cord, actually.
I know, but it extends quite a bit, huh?
Oh yeah.
So we
didn't need it, so
But
we can move it even further over. Yeah, but there's no power over here.
No, I was just thinking we could run the wires so it comes.
Oh, behind us.
Behind.
Well, that's true.
So give us a couple of seconds. Sorry about the heat, guys. The library says that there is a problem with their AC sensor, and so they'll be working on it.
In other words, just chill out.
Yeah, exactly. Keep
If only we could.
and then I'll just run this behind you. And
All right. So just as long as the top faces up. There's a little hole in the top.
I'm really looking forward to that. Sierra Nevada.
Oh, and you have a microphone? Oh, good. Excellent.
Yeah, I have a microphone.
And yeah, sure. Okay, great. You have the yeah, absolutely. Well, our next speaker is Brooklyn, and she's going to talk about 4 astronauts that have inspired her. And I find Brooklyn to be quite inspirational myself. She's on the robotics team at her school. She plays tennis, and she is an amazing person that has been presenting a little bit about space into our past few meetings. So I really look forward to hearing about your four astronauts.
Okay. Hello, my name is. Oh wait. We're gonna have Jeopardy at the end, so if you want to listen, we can get some gifts. So, hello, my name is Brooklynn Levi. I play tennis. I'm 12 years old. I go to McAdams Junior High School, and I'm a robotics member, and I've been playing tennis since I was 4 years old. So, our first African American astronaut, female astronaut, is Dr. Mae Jemison. She was born on October 17th, 1956 in Alabama. She was raised in Chicago, where she graduated from high school with a passion for dance. Mae started studying ballet at the age of 8 and entered high school at 12 years old, which is my age right now. She went on to attend Stanford University at the age 16 and graduated in 1977. She received 2 degrees. She served as the head of the Black Student Union. Her degrees were in chemical engineering and African American studies. She received a medical degree from Cornell University. Mae struggled about whether going to medical school or being a professional dancer during her senior year in college. She continued to study dance and enrolled in Alley American Dance Theater, which my cousin Alana goes to and attends in New York. She was excited to hear the news. October 19th, 1985. Jemison applied to NASA for the astronaut program. She was chosen out of 2,000 applicants for 15 slots. While working for NASA, she did launch support activities at Kennedy Space Center in Florida in verification of shuttle computer software and shuttle avionics integration laboratory. On September 28, 1989, she was selected for the STS-47 crew as a mission specialist 4. I have a patch on my jacket to remind me of her first flight. But let's get to the video. You sure? Mm-hmm.
I grew up in the 60s. I lived on the south side of Chicago. And I was a young girl who loved to stare up at the stars. I imagined myself going there. I studied all the things about the Apollo program. I knew what mission was going to take place when, what it was supposed to accomplish. I decided to go to medical school because I wanted to do something called biomedical engineering. While I was in medical school, I had the opportunity to go and work at a Cambodia refugee camp. I learned to study group in Cuba. I worked with the flying doctors in East Africa. But I still wanted to go into space, so I applied. Picked up the phone. I called down the Johnson Space Center. I said, I would like an application to be an astronaut. They didn't laugh. I turned in the application. And there may be a certain naivete when I applied to the astronaut program, I didn't even think about the fact of whether I would be the first African American woman in space or anything like that. It didn't even cross my I wanted to go into space. I couldn't have cared if there had been 1,000 people in space before me or whether there had been none. I wanted to go. I thought it was important to take to space with me things that represented people who sometimes are not included. So I took a poster of Judith Jamison performing the dance cry. I took a Bundu statue, which was for the Women's Society in West Africa. I took up a flag for the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, the oldest African American women's sorority in the United States, because they hadn't been included, and I thought that was an important thing to do. For me, the experience was one that made me feel very connected with the universe. I felt my being was as much a part of this universe as any stars, any comet. It helped me to recognize that right now, we're in space. This Earth is part of that universe. That was my grand connection. And then I looked down and I saw Chicago. I thought about the little girl who had assumed she was going to space. What would my younger self have thought if she met me? And I think she would have been too.
I have a patch on my jacket to remind me of her first flight. It's right here. And give me inspiration to never give up. Jemison flew her only space mission on September 12th, 20th, 1992, as one of the 7-member crew aboard Space Shuttle Endeavour, making her the first African American woman in space. She logged 190 hours, 30 minutes, 23 seconds in space and orbited Earth 127 times. Our next female astronaut, African American astronaut, is Stephanie Wilson. Born September 27, 1966, in Boston, Massachusetts, and grew up in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. She is an American engineer and a NASA astronaut. She was encouraged in high school to go into engineering, so she started to become an aerospace engineer. She attended Harvard University and received her Bachelor of Science degree in Engineering Science in 1988. She went on to attend the University of Texas, where she earned a Master of Science degree in Aerospace Engineering in 1992. She was selected by NASA in 1996 as an astronaut candidate. She was qualified as a mission specialist. She served in the astronaut office Capcom branch, working in the mission control as a prime communicator on orbit crews. She was later assigned technical duties in the astronaut office shuttle operations branch, involving the space shuttle main engine's external tank and solid rocket boosters. Wilson had flown 3 space shuttle missions: STS-121 as a mission specialist, STS-120, STS-131. On April 2010, October 18, 2019, she was ground controller at Houston for all-women spacewalk. In December of 2020, NASA announced that Wilson was among the candidates for the Artemis program, and if selected, could be the first woman and first African American on the moon. This is the video.
Mission Specialist number 3, Stephanie Wilson, making her first flight into space. She'll sit in that seat right between and behind the pilot commander.
Every space flight is special. The first space flight is very memorable for everyone. On the day of launch, everyone's very excited, and it's very surreal when the solid rocket boosters and the main engines ignite. It's very apparent that we're going somewhere, and it's the best 8.5-minute ride ever. The view from space is spectacular. It can be very peaceful, very serene. The colors are so vivid. The vibrant orange of the Sahara Desert, the blue-green color of the oceans. It's a wonderful sight to behold. And what is readily transparent is that while there may or may not be strife on Earth, it appears to us to be one unified planet. And having that perspective of one Earth and one humanity is one that we definitely appreciate having from space. I had a great curiosity for what's unknown, and I like to solve problems. So trying to understand and have a better sense of the universe and what that means to humanity, who we are, what our history is, and how we leverage that knowledge to bring benefits to humanity was something that struck me, and I hope to work with in the future. I have certainly benefited by having some great mentors in the office across NASA. One thing that veterans of space flights do is they share their expertise and their experience during the mission.
Christina, on the UIA, check oxygen EM1 and 2. Oxygen EM1 and 2 are open.
And I do my best to pass along the experience and the knowledge that I have gained to others in the office and with the next generation, so that we can have a better future for all of humanity.
This one is my other space patch that's for Wilson. So yeah, it's basically it. Our next African American astronaut is Dr. Sine Proctor, born March 28, 1970 in Guam. Her father was an engineer working for NASA at Guam Remote Ground Terminal during the Apollo era. She moved to the U.S. in her younger years and graduated from Fairport High School in Fairport, New York. She received her undergraduate degree on environmental sciences and later her master's degree in geology in Arizona State University. In 2006, she received her PhD in science education and received her pilot's license. 2009, she was a finalist for the 2009 NASA astronaut selection process. She was one out of 3,500 applicants, but she was not selected. She flew to space as a commercial astronaut and pilot of the Crew Dragon orbital spaceflight mission Inspiration 4 on September 15, 2021. She was a part of the first all-civilian human spaceflight mission. She was an international speaker, communicating about science education, leadership, special simulations, sustainable foods, and diversity in science. She is the one who inspired me to be the keynote speaker today. I like that she is an artist like myself and took several items to space and brought it back down for different people. This is a video. We have 2 videos, so.
I'm Dr. Cyan Proctor, and last year I spent 3 days in space and got to experience Earth light. I thought the moonlight was my guiding light until that day when my soul shimmered, eyes wide and dilated with realization, for there I was, being bathed in Earth light, tasered by the pulsating Earth glow. My weeping ego quivers, spellbound in awe at the cosmic chaos perched against the death, a clear beacon of hope and longing, etched by complex molecules and spiraling DNA, golden strands of energy cascading outward, encapsulating hopes and dreams, existence and affirmation. The baby's blanket ripped away. I howl at the sensation. Love struck in suspension. My mind struggles to comprehend. So much meta transcending time and space. Who will hear the cries of the generations? Afro-Gaia simmers under the weight of memories. I hold court among the stars, and I testify to the cosmos. All our hopes set adrift. Let us be set free in a sea of forgiveness for what we have not seen. If only we could all be baptized by earth light.
Hey, hey, can you hear me okay?
I can, what's going on?
I just got home, my brother just dropped me off. Thanks, I know, I can't believe it. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the closing thing at SpaceX with the debrief was really great, and the best part was they gave me my SpaceX wings, the dragon wings.
Congrats.
I know, I can't believe it. It's been just a crazy 6 months, my God. Oh,
And you're back now. Now it's on to the next phase.
Yeah, well, the best part is, okay, so I thought that they were going to mail everything back, but I brought a suitcase and they actually gave me everything. So everything we packed for space that went to space is now here with me in my bag. one of the things that a lot of people didn't realize is that when you're packing for space, you have to pack months in advance because you've got to get that stuff to SpaceX, and then they got to figure out where it's going to go in the Dragon capsule for the center of gravity. Kind of feel it, you get that feeling of being pulled back again, that sensation of that thrust, even though I'm just watching it. When I got off the plane and my brother picked me up and, I'm wheeling this home, I started thinking about everything that's in here and how, treasured it is. I had to pack it, so it's not like, SpaceX when I was there. I packed a suitcase within a suitcase, so I was able to, where to begin? Right. What was interesting was learning that we didn't have a little bit of space for our own personal things to take to space. We had a duffel bag of space. And that really just changed everything because now you're like, oh, I can bring some serious stuff. What's the most important things to me? And one of them was absolutely from the beginning, how do I bring my family and friends along on this journey? And how do I be able to bring something special for them, they're choosing, to space, and then be able to bring it back to them and give them this? There's a lot in here. Oh, man. And it's kind of heavy. Oh, wow. So the first thing in here is my SpaceX bag. This is the duffel. This bag is what they said we could pack. So I filled this, and it's funny, they're like, leave a little room. And they had originally these spacers in here to exact the volume. And I was like, I didn't leave any room. I packed this thing in. One of the things that was really important to me was that I could not only represent myself as an artist, but also bring artists and poets along with me. We got a bunch of poets together here. Actually, this is more of them back here. And they sent me these poems. And this is the one who was the Arizona poet who I met downtown once at a bar. He had his typewriter set up. He types on an old-fashioned typewriter, and you can pay to have him do on the fly a special poem. So I reached out to him and I said, yeah, I will fly your poem. And he typed it up, and he did 3 copies of it, and now I get to give it back to him, sign it and give it back to him. Now we met it flew into space.
Having something taken to space is a really special thing, and to me, it's very special because, one, I am a big space fan. I've been looking up at the stars my entire life, like most people. I was the first person that Cyan was able to tell about getting selected for the competition. And so, I've been on this journey with her since the very beginning, and to see it all happen and have a piece of mind fly in space with her and then come back is just really special.
Yep. So now that I'm back home, I wanted to throw a little party to just get together and hang out, but also return the item that I took to space for them. And so I'm super excited because I think a few of them know that they're getting their items, but not everybody. And then I have a couple of special gifts to give them too that they don't know is happening. So it's going to be a fun night.
Okay, so that was it. Yeah, I know. This is actually a patch that was flown into space, which is one of my mom's co-workers, Dr. Alyssa Dinguez, and she gave it back. She gave me the patch. We don't have it here, but it's really cool. That was flown into space. Our next African-American female astronaut is Dr. Janet Epps, born November 3rd, 1970, in Syracuse, New York, with a twin sister named Janet. They were both great at math, like me. She went to Lamont College when she received her bachelor's degree in physics. She also attended the University of Maryland, where she received her master's and PhD in Aerospace Engineering. While getting her degree in Maryland, she was awarded a NASA GRSP fellowship and went to publish many academic works around her research in materials engineering. After graduating, she worked in research at Ford Motor Company. Dr. Epps also worked in the CIA Technical Intelligence Officer. In June 2009, she was selected as an astronaut candidate for the 20th class of NASA. Her training included Russian spacewalk, robotics training, and geology. I like robotics too, and that's why she's a big inspiration for me. She was a astronaut on the Aquarius underwater laboratory during the Nemo 18th underwater exploration for 9 days in July 2014. She won the Johnson Space Center Directions Innovation Group Achievement Award in 2013 for her work in the Generic Joint Operation Panel for her work on crew efficiency on the ISS. 2019, she completed the ESA CAVES training program, which shows the demands of exploring unknown terrains like those on the moons and Mars. She is the second woman to participate in CAVES. March 4th, 2024, she was launched as a mission specialist on SpaceX Crew 8, which was a half-year mission on board the Dragon Endeavour. She became the second African-American woman to be a part of a long-duration mission on board the ISS. She recently returned from the ISS on October 25, 2024, after 235 days in space, which set the single mission record of the longest time an American crewed the spacecraft spent in space. This is the video.
What I love about space exploration is finding out new things, learning new things we never thought we would learn in my lifetime. My name is Jeanette Epps. I am a mission specialist for the NASA SpaceX Crew 8 mission to the International Space Station. I am from Syracuse, New York, where it's very cold. I am one of 7 children. My twin sister, Janet, yes, Janet and Jeanette, we both love science as kids. Janet went on to become a molecular cell biologist, and I became an aerospace engineer. I think I always secretly wanted to become an astronaut. I just never thought that it was something that was obtainable. In 2008, a friend of mine, Leland Melvin, called me and said that they were accepting applications for the next class. I thought it was my last chance to apply, and so I did. June 2009, I received a phone call from Peggy Whitson, and she asked if I wanted to join the astronaut corps. It was very overwhelming and emotional for me to actually get that call and be selected. Prior to coming to NASA, I worked for Ford Motor Company, and then I went on to work for the Central Intelligence Agency. At both of those places, I learned to be very deep in technical matters, but then also how to become operational. Our mission will entail getting on a vehicle, flying to the space station, taking care of the International Space Station, and then we'll also conduct experiments. Each individual will be an experiment in and of themselves, how our cells behave, how our blood changes, how our bone density changes, muscle mass. We're looking at everything to figure out countermeasures for the human body so that it can live longer and longer outside the Earth's protection. Not only will we be an experiment, but we'll have other experiments on board that we'll conduct. The experiments that we conduct hopefully will get the human body and other things to the moon, and then from the moon to Mars. I will be the GEM specialist, which is the Japanese experiment module. I may get a chance to operate their robotic arm to help them with experiments that they'll do outside of the space station. Since this will be my first trip to the International Space Station, I'm looking forward to viewing the Earth from an amazing vantage point, but also experiencing all the nuances that go along with that. As we walk to the launch pad, as we're strapped into the vehicle, the things that I believe I'll be feeling, unbelief, surrealism, but also joy. And then once we go into orbit, just to see the Earth from that vantage point, and then thinking of ways that we're going to work on the space station that's going to help our home that we're now untethered to. When I get to the space station, I'm expecting that it will be like home. We train so much here on Earth in the mock-up that looks just like the International Space Station. The biggest thing I'll have to do is adapt to space during the first 2 weeks of being there, and then I'll settle into home.
I also have a patch from her mission, which is on the back. You can't see it right now. And yeah, we have a Space Jeopardy. Any questions first? No questions? Okay, well, we have Space Jeopardy, so if you want to do it. Who was the first African American female astronaut? Does anybody have the answer? Just raise your hand. Yes? Yes. Okay, the second question. Which African American female astronaut worked for the CIA? Who? Yes. Okay, the third question is, which African American female astronaut had a father work at NASA? Yes. Okay, this is our last question. Wait, no? Oh yeah, we have 2 more. Okay. Which African American female has flown 3 shuttle mission flights? No one knows? Wilson? Yes. Okay. Got last one. What do I dream to be when I grow up? Which picture? Oh, I did? Oh my. Okay, wait, there.
So there's your vision. What did you write on that wall?
I want to be an aerospace engineer.
All right.
Aerospace Engineering.
That's it. Thank you. My shout out to my mom. Shout out to my mentor, Nathan. Shout out to John Davis, who's in the back. And all the African American astronauts and everybody who listened to my presentation. Thank you.
Brooklyn, that was amazing. I had this weird experience as I was watching those videos of like 2 decades from now, a 12-year-old being up here and Brooklyn's video being up there on the screen. That's been awesome. Well, great job.
Thank
you so much for doing that. Well, that concludes our meeting. So after this, you are welcome to join us at Dave's right down the road. I have a map on how to get there. And you're welcome to get there. Before we go, I would like them to join the group picture, if you don't mind. I'll get the people online up here. So if you're
Since no one got this one, you can have this.
thanks so much.
Yeah.
Turn it on.
That was exactly 30 minutes.
You did your point. You did right on time. Excellent. Excellent. Good job, girl.
Hug. Thank you. It was exactly 30 minutes.
Really?
Yeah.
Maybe I could get everybody up here and we're gonna do a picture. We actually this time we got a really formal
Oh, thank you. Oh, you want my mic? Where's my mic? Oh, I'm. How do I take it off?
Oh, there's a clip.
Oh,
It's like that.
I always
Yeah.
Let's get a second row here in front.
Oh,
Our chair here.
Yes, you definitely should be in the front.
right here.
Should we put 10 seconds on it so you can get up to about the challenge? Okay. Everybody in it?
I'm gonna run over there.
Okay.
Okay, ready? So, yeah.
Eight.
Stop, stop.
Okay. Awesome.
Check it first.
Yeah. Okay.
I wanted to ask you something.
Yeah.
Do you know how long the rocket goes around the moon? The Earth?
The rocket, which one?
The moon or the Earth? Choose the moon or the
Oh, going around the moon, going around the Earth.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's like a 28-day kind of a cycle.
Almost a month.
Yeah.
See you next month.
Yeah,
Lee.
basically once a month. That's why it's half daylight for 14 days, and then it's night for 14 days.
Be over there.
Yep, see ya.